The PlayStation Classic is a plug-and-play console that includes 20 games pre-installed from the PlayStation released in 1994. It came hot off the heels of Nintendo's Classic Edition consoles, with the NES Classic in 2016 and the Super Nintendo Classic in 2017. With the PlayStation Classic being announced in September 2018 and releasing in December that same year, it released for $100 and was met with lukewarm responses. Many noted that the PlayStation games, which were made in the industry's transition from 2D to 3D, did not hold up as well as the 2D games on the NES and SNES Classic consoles. Other issues included the controllers not having analog sticks. Despite some of the games being in 3D, the controller's cords not being long enough, and 9 out of the 20 games were the European versions, meaning that games didn't look as well on American televisions. Out of the 20 games included, there were a few confusing entries, like why was Mr. Driller included, but Crash and Spyro weren't, with IGN calling it more of a half-hearted nod than a top-shelf tribute to Sony's era-defining console. While you can't blame Sony for trying to release a competitor to the Nintendo Classic consoles that had dominated the holiday seasons the 2 years prior, though it's disappointing to see how Sony executed this mini console, but almost unsurprising knowing their track record with backwards compatibility. If only Sony was remastering the mini console. If they can remaster The Last of Us Part 2, only 4 years after launch, they should spend more time on games that haven't been touched in 30 years. But what effect did the PlayStation Classic Mini have on the PlayStation used game market? Using PriceCharting.com, I looked at the prices of the 20 games included, and an additional 20 games not on the Classic, to see how they compare. I looked at 2 years prior from the announcement and release, and then from the month before the console was announced to January 2021. We also take a look at January 2024 while making this video. This took a lot of time to research and put together, so if you find it interesting, please drop a like and subscribe below. For the Classic games, from the month of announcement, September 2018, to December 2018, the month of launch, the price dropped 0.41%. From the launch in December 2018 to today, January 2024, 6 years after the console came out, the total price of all the games included on the console went from being purchasable for $253.72 to $446.17, growing 63.68% over the 6 years. For the sample games, from September 2018 to December 2018, the price grew 10.42%. From December 2018 to January 2024, the total price of all the games sampled went from being purchasable for $280.54 to $698.33, growing 107.54%. From the beginning, the Classic games were cheaper than the games sampled. That being said, the Classic games only grew 63.8%, while the sample games grew 107.54%. The PS Classic is a very cheap console nowadays, so I would suspect that being an official PlayStation product has bridged the gap between emulation and collecting, just enough for there to be less demand for these games, explaining why the games not on the Classic might see a greater rise in price compared to the games on the Classic. When the PlayStation Classic first launched, you could either spend $297.90 for a PlayStation 1 console, plus the games that would be included with the PlayStation Classic, or you could spend $100 on the PlayStation Classic. Today you could spend $486.37 for a console and all the games, or you can spend $37.91 to get a PlayStation Classic. The original PlayStation 1 was a generally cheap console before the release of the mini console. Unlike the Nintendo mini consoles, the games were generally not expensive. There's also the fact that COVID raised demand for all video games since March 2020. But I think there was also a change in collecting in general. The PlayStation 1 was not a typical collection piece, leaving it as a console that had cheaper hidden gems. And with a lot of other consoles being picked cleaned, it was time for the PlayStation to come to light. I have no reason to believe that the PlayStation Classic Mini was a major reason people were collecting PlayStation 1 games and driving the price. While the PlayStation Classic wasn't exactly the hit Nintendo mini consoles were, it's interesting to see how it came at the time that players were just starting to be interested in PlayStation 1 again. While this might have been some players' first time experiencing what the PlayStation 1 had to offer, it was more of a cash grab than a tribute on the PlayStation's 25th anniversary. It didn't come close to the sale of Nintendo's classic consoles, which combined sold about 10 million boxes. Comparing it to Nintendo's classic consoles, the PlayStation Classic only sold 120,000 units in Japan within its first week. Comparing that to Nintendo's classic consoles, the NES Mini sold 260,000 in its first week, and the Super Nintendo Classic sold 340,000 units in the same time period. I could not find any more sales figures for the console past the first week, but I'm fairly sure that Sony didn't want to publish them after the much lower than expected turnout. The only news I can find on the PlayStation Classic post-launch was that retailers started selling it at a steep discount only a month after launch. with it going from $100 to $60. Many who buy this console now do so to use it as a base for emulation. With the console's aesthetics and included controllers, it's an alternative to a Raspberry Pi for those who like the retro console look but don't want to have to deal with the ever-changing retro game prices. And with the console going for less than $40 nowadays, I can't blame anyone for getting this with the intention of adding more games. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more, and also check out my video on the Super Nintendo Classic. Thanks for watching.